There is a certain kind of loneliness that only appears when you are surrounded by the people who chose you. Not the loneliness of being alone, not the clean, manageable ache of missing someone. Something more specific than that. Something quieter and harder to name. It arrives in the middle of an evening with your oldest friends, in the middle of a conversation that is warm and familiar and full of real laughter, and still leaves you driving home with a weight in your chest that you cannot explain to anyone, because how do you explain that you felt lonely in a room full of the people who have known you the longest? How do you say out loud, "I love them completely and I am not entirely reachable by them anymore"? And the hardest part, the part that makes this particular loneliness so difficult to carry, is that there is no villain in the story. No one was unkind, no one failed. The people in that room have chosen you genuinely and for a long time, and you love them back with the same completeness. But something shifted somewhere in the slow and irreversible work of a life genuinely lived, and now the person they reach for when they say your name, the version they hold with such certainty, that person has not quite existed for years. If you know that feeling, that precise nameless ache of sitting in a room full of your oldest people and sensing the gap, then you are not alone in this, and you are not broken for feeling it. Before we go any further, share in the comments where you're watching from and whether this is something you've been carrying in silence, because I think more people are living inside this particular grief than anyone admits out loud. And stay with me until the end, because what I'm going to share in the second half of this completely changes how you understand the distance and the love that survived it. Let me tell you about Adam. Adam grew up inside a friendship group that was by most measures a good one. There was loyalty, fierce, unquestioned, the kind that shows up without being asked. There was humor and shared history and the particular warmth of people who have known each other long enough to communicate in shorthand. They had found each other in the years when everything was still forming, when the choices felt permanent and the closeness felt like something that would simply last. His friends were grounded people who had made what they had from consistency and who held with understandable certainty the world as they had always understood it. But Adam read widely, hungrily from a young age. He asked questions the group did not always have the patience for. He felt things at angles the friendship did not naturally accommodate, not because his friends were unkind, but because they operated in the language of familiarity, and he had been born inconveniently in the language of depth. He was 19 when he first felt it. He had come back from a period away burning with something, an idea he had been turning over, some angle on the world that had rearranged something inside him. And he sat down with his oldest friends and tried with too much eagerness to share it. He watched the group's response. Not hostile, not dismissive exactly, more like the way a room responds to music that is not quite the right genre for the occasion. A polite waiting for it to finish, a gentle steering back toward familiar ground. He understood the message, not the one they intended. They had intended no harm, but the one that arrived underneath the response regardless. This part of you does not quite fit the room. So Adam learned to leave that part of himself elsewhere. He moved into his own work and his own thinking. He found for the first time conversations that wanted to go somewhere new, ideas that pressed back and made him think further and differently than he had known was possible. He changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but thoroughly. The way a river changes a landscape quietly and without pause until the terrain no longer resembles what it was. He came back to the group. He sat in the same rooms. He loved his friends with the same completeness he always had. But he could no longer pretend the gap was not there. And what followed, the years of managing the distance, of translating himself for the room, of feeling seen as a younger version of himself, while the actual version stood slightly to the side. That was the part no one had warned him about. He had been told what growth costs in effort and discipline. No one had told him what it costs in belonging. Adam's story is not just his. It is the story of millions of people who grew in a direction their oldest friends could not follow, and are now living quietly with the grief that creates. Researchers have been mapping this territory for decades. Carl Jung named the underlying process individuation, the slow, winding work through which a person carves out an identity that is genuinely their own, rather than simply wearing the one that was placed on them before they had the words to question it. A self that can hold its own shape, independent of the roles and expectations the original group assigned long before any choosing was possible. But the framework that names this most precisely comes from social psychologist Henri Tajfel, who spent his career studying how group membership shapes individual identity. Tajfel called it social identity theory. The more deeply your sense of self is woven into a shared group identity, he found, the more disorienting any genuine divergence from that group becomes, not just as a social loss, but as a psychological one. Because when a friendship group has been one of the architects of who you believe yourself to be, growing beyond it does not simply feel like outgrowing people, it feels like outgrowing a version of yourself. And here is the finding that almost no one names out loud. Those with stronger personal identity, the ones who moved beyond their group's shared emotional and intellectual center, did not become less loyal or less loving. They developed something different, the ability to be genuinely present without being absorbed, to sit with the people they cared about without quietly folding themselves into the shape the room expected. Not detachment, not coldness, not a broken friendship wearing the mask of self-protection. That is what happens when a person grows authentically into themselves, past the edges of the group that helped form them. And the loneliness that comes with it, that precise ache of caring deeply for people who cannot quite reach the person you have become, is not a character flaw. It is not self-pity dressed in philosophical language. It is real grief with real weight that deserves to be felt honestly and not folded away in the dark on the drive home. But here is what almost no one in this position gets told. Not by the friends, they cannot offer what they cannot see. And not by the wider world either, which tends to dress this kind of growth in the language of achievement. You evolved. You outpaced your starting point. You should be proud. All of that, without a single word about what the becoming quietly costs. Here is the hidden paradox buried inside this particular distance. Hold that. We're going there next. And when you see it clearly, it will change not just how you understand the gap, but how you understand the love that survived it. Here is the paradox. Outgrowing your friends does not diminish the love. If anything, it deepens it in ways that only difficulty can. Consider what loving someone effortlessly actually requires. When someone shares your references, mirrors your instincts, and speaks your language without needing it explained, that love is warm and real, but it demands almost nothing of you. The current carries you both. The closeness requires no effort. because no distance has to be crossed, but to love people across a real gap, to keep showing up in a room where the version of you they hold no longer quite matches who is standing there, to do it without resentment, without performance, with something that is genuinely tender. That is a different thing entirely. That is a love that made a choice, that stayed after the easy reasons to stay were gone. And here is the other side of it, the side that is even harder to see. The growth that created the distance, the curiosity, the ambition, the willingness to keep asking questions the room found inconvenient. That was nurtured, however quietly, inside that group. Those friendships built something. They created a kind of safety around you, the kind of ground that makes it possible to lean towards something more. The values that drove the becoming were built on a foundation the friendship laid. Even when the friends cannot recognize their own architecture in what was constructed on top of it, the person who outgrew their friends was shaped by them first, and the gap, the painful, unwanted, quietly mourned gap, is not a contradiction of that gift. It is the evidence of it. They were given enough to become more than the room could hold. Now here is where the conversation shifts, and this is the layer that changes what you actually do with all of this. Understanding the paradox intellectually is one thing. Holding it as a concept is useful. But there is something underneath the concept, something that lives not in the thinking mind, but in the body. And until that layer is addressed, the gap tends to stay tender, a wound, rather than simply the shape this particular love has taken. What neuroscience tells us brings a kind of clarity to all of this. The human brain is built, at its most fundamental level, for connection. Belonging is not a preference, it is a biological imperative. Research out of UCLA demonstrated that the neural pathways activated by social rejection are the same ones that respond to physical pain. Not metaphorically, literally the same circuitry. The brain registers being shut out from the people it depends on as a real threat, because for most of human history it was. For someone who has grown beyond their friend group, this is what that means in practice. Every time you step into that room and register the gap, every time the conversation loops back to the same well-worn ground, every time the version of you they reach for is one you quietly left behind, your nervous system notices. It sends a signal. Not a dramatic one, but a real one. A low-level, persistent reminder that what once felt like safety now carries a slight misalignment. And that signal, felt repeatedly over months and years, becomes its own kind of weight. Not from a single devastating event, from the ordinary, relentless work of being cared for by people who cannot quite see you, and staying present for it anyway. This is not fragility. This is your nervous system functioning precisely as it was built to. And here is where the research gives us something worth holding on to. The brain is not fixed. The patterns that formed inside the original friendship group, the reflexes, the self-editing, the habitual shrinking into the expected version, none of that is permanent. Neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong capacity to reshape itself through new experience, means that the self you carry into that old room is not the only version available. New experiences of being fully seen, in new relationships, in communities you have chosen, in spaces where the version of you that stands slightly to the side in that old room can finally step forward. These build new neural pathways alongside the old ones, not replacements, alternatives. Internal reference points that begin to tell a different story about what belonging can feel like. And as those pathways strengthen, the old room loses its hold. You stop needing it to change. You stop being so entirely dependent on its recognition to feel real. But none of that is accessible until something else happens first. And this is the step that cannot be bypassed, no matter how much busyness or distance or quiet management makes it feel like it already has been. There is grief here that needs to actually land, not the compressed variety that rides home silently and gets outpaced by the next full week. Actual grief for what is genuinely lost in this kind of growing, for the version of closeness that once required no effort before the growth made it complicated, for the hope held quietly longer than most people would want to admit that the friends would eventually see all of you and expand the room, that the conversation would finally go somewhere genuinely new, that the gap would close. It will not close, not in the form you have been imagining. That is worth sitting with. The closeness that existed before you became more than the room could hold. That deserves real mourning, because it was genuine, because for a long stretch of your life, those people and those rooms were home, because the loss of what they were is not a story of betrayal or failure. Nobody chose it. It happened anyway. And the grief, when it is finally given space to be what it is, does something that no amount of quiet management ever could. It lifts the pressure, the steady, low-level pressure of returning to those rooms carrying an expectation you have learned not to name. That something will be different this time, that they will finally reach the version of you who is actually standing there. When the grief is real, the waiting can stop. Not the love, the waiting. And in the space the waiting leaves behind, the space where the impossible hope used to live, something more honest becomes available. A way of being in that room that is neither the performance of perfect closeness nor the managed politeness that keeps everyone at arm's length. Something truer than both. A love that meets the friends as they actually are, not as the people you have continued to hope they might become. That can show up for what is genuinely there, the constancy, the laughter, the shared reference points, the particular tenderness of people who witnessed you before you understood yourself, without quietly grieving all evening over what will never quite be possible. The gap does not have to close to stop hurting. It can become something else entirely. The honest, unresolved, real shape of this particular bond. If you are the person this video is describing, the one who walks into that room, feels the warmth of people who have known you longest, and still cannot quite shake the quiet distance that no amount of effort or goodwill has managed to close, then this is for you. You are not broken for feeling the gap. You are not a bad friend for having grown past it. And you are not alone in the particular loneliness of loving people across a distance that no one outside of it can quite see. You are allowed to show up with real care and still not perform a closeness you no longer feel. You are allowed to grieve what the friendship once was without treating the grief as a betrayal of what it still is. You are allowed to participate in the conversation that is available genuinely, warmly, without spending the entire evening in mourning for the conversation that cannot happen. You are allowed to hold the gap without guilt, because the distance between who they are and who you have become is not a verdict on your loyalty. It is a record of interior movement, the kind that builds quietly and without announcement in a person who keeps moving forward, even when it costs something. You kept moving. Through rooms that had stopped fitting you, through conversations that kept circling back before they could go anywhere new, and through years of offering a translation of yourself to people you loved but who could only partly receive it. You kept moving, and you became something real in the process. That is not a betrayal of where you came from. It is the most genuine thing you could have made from it. The friends who could not follow you were still part of what made it possible to go. And maybe in certain quiet moments in that room, in the middle of a conversation, doing what it has always done, moving in its familiar orbit, you will find something unexpected waiting inside that recognition. A softness, a kind of gratitude that does not require the distance to close in order to feel real. The understanding that they did what they could with what they had. That the room they built was the room they were capable of building. That you grew past it, not because something was missing, but because they gave you enough, just enough, barely enough, to want something more. And that is not a small thing. That is everything.